So let's grab a couple chairs and a few more. Yeah, of course. Throw one out.
So just to clarify, revolutionary time in the Sunrod film, we did what you're talking about with the musicality of human beings, and you're talking about harmony, right? So are you talking about revolutionary time as harmony, or revolutionary time more like Martin Luther King was talking about opportune time?
That's so interesting.
Like Pyros.
Can I just say something? Because I wanted to include Martin Luther King in this, especially his notion that man is made for God. And and the question is, who is God? But this idea that man, and of course we're talking about man, woman, or even if you transcend the binary, but the human species is made for something other than this. I think Sun Ra is saying something very similar. That's why the metaphor of outer space, with all of the ambiguities and irony of it. I think that's where I would answer the question, that revolutionary time is not interested in normal time, be it in scientific, phenomenological, organization of work, whatever. It is not interested in time like that. And I think, if I could just say quickly, I think one of the problems that revolutionary movements have had in this country and in the West is they're being bound to the issue of a future and of time and the notion of progress. Yeah. That's and I don't think I've worked it all out in my own head.
Yeah, because for Martin Luther King, the opportune time was just like almost the wrong time. Like it's out of time. It's out of time.
Can I just say something? Oh no, I'll shut up. We'll talk after the thing.
There's a lot to do. We are at 5:53. I would love to pursue this thing about time. It is philosophical. When Alex said, if you model time as something that you have to catch up to, and you say, let's be in it, which is really just means let's try to catch up to it, and you'll never, what's the connection to the civilization of potentiality was the first thing I thought of, because wouldn't that mean the potentiality is always in the future? Yeah, let's not go here. Maybe there's better ways of exploring that.
Potential versus possible.
What's that?
Potential versus possible.
Potential versus possible. That too. Well, can I just maybe kick off by one thing? I really would like for Diann and Rasheedah to get an opportunity to have some back and forth about interventions into physics, right? And the position of, I guess the position of art or literary strategies that almost risks the pseudoscience, right? But if the question is to institutionalize, you have to face it in a way, because I'm on the side of let's infiltrate, right? Which is why I see it that way. But I don't know if that's what you're thinking. But just before, I also was wondering about, because you said the Kantian thing about time, where you need time because you need in order to think, and I wondered if, because for Laboria Cuboniks, the distinction between negative and positive freedom is such an enormous piece of the puzzle, and I also wondered, how you saw that, because I think you do very interesting things with that distinction as well. The distinction between freedom from something and freedom to do what you want to do. So I don't know if maybe briefly, if you had a question you wanted to ask Rasheedah, Diann, maybe that would be.
I kind of don't know where to start. I just want to get in touch with her sort of and try and pick her brain. I don't have anything. I've got so many notes actually in front of me that I can't read any of them, unfortunately. But thing.
course, of course.
Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Thinking about that recently, and I think one of the things we don't actually speak about in the manifesto, but probably should, or should somehow elaborate on, is it seems to me one of the major differences between freedom from and freedom to is that you already have to have a certain amount of privilege to be able to have access to the freedom to. You know, I mean, I think if you're very much bound in sort of very basic needs, the freedom to almost seems a non-issue, because you're just trying to sort of, it's like freedom from all the sorts of horrible things that humans can be subject to. So I mean, I don't know that we've really gone into that, but I think that's something we might need to elaborate at some point. Is that the presumption of freedom to that, you know, we avow like not just a freedom from, but a freedom to. I think it presumes a level of privilege that might be too quick to presume. I think if we're going to talk about universalisms in any sort of real way. So yeah, I just sort of wanted to make that point. It's something I'm thinking about lately. It's not really a time thing. I mean, the time thing I could go on for a long time, but I don't know. If there's like specific things about it, I maybe we'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, I can sort of respond to some of that, and just to say that what drew me to Afrofuturism in the first place, and I am a graduate of Temple University and took classes in African American Studies, and I always talk about how I felt so. Coming to Temple and taking those classes, I felt indoctrinated sort of in the opposite direction, in a good way, in a way that helped me to find identity, but in a way that very much put me in that realm that you were just very eloquently talking about, being a people of myself and in myself, and not, you know, sort of the opposite. But anyway, part of what attracted me to Afrofuturism was the potentiality of the accessibility for people who do not otherwise have access to these ideas. Because I always talk about Afrofuturism, sort of where it emerged from is academia, and it was coined, the term itself was coined by a white man, but you know, quite obviously what is Afrofuturism was being done long before the coining of the term. But I worry about it being housed in academia and taking on those characteristics, in that it's not accessible to people. It is accessible to people through the internet, but even that contains with it a certain privilege. And me and Kamei were just talking about ourselves as privileged in certain ways, just because I have a college education. You know, I come from a poor background, and, you know, I'm oppressed in certain ways just by my very existence, but I do have privilege in some ways. And so I'm very interested in how Afrofuturism is a thing for the people. Like, in and of itself, its whole conception should be accessible to people who do not otherwise have access to those ideas. And so I'm interested in using my organization and my theories and thoughts. You know, I was talking about the workshops, bringing them to, you know, going to do these workshops and making these ideas accessible to people. You know, because how are we ever going to be liberated if 99% of us don't have the language, don't have the tools, don't have the tech to become liberated, and that's the people that we're leaving behind. And so we're very often talking about these people and idealizing them as being a part of these theories and these movements, but we're not in touch with these people in any consistent or substantive way. You know, and again, I'm privileged because of where I work. Like, I'm an attorney, and so I work with poor people every day, and that's a privilege that I have access to people in that way to spread these ideas. But, you know, otherwise we're very cut off from each other, and people, you know, I fear even with these like Black Lives Matter movement, which I have much respect for what they're doing, but it's still a privileged movement. We're still, you know, the people who are in need of, you know, the things that they're offering do not hear it. They're not there. So I could talk about it all day, but I think you're very right that it you know, there's still a question of access and privilege when it comes to these liberation movements.
Can I ask why? I just want to know why, because I feel like I've come back over here and sort of know the Black Lives Matter movement through the newspapers, more or less. So I mean, I'm curious why you say that it's a movement of privilege itself.
I think, again, because from what see, and then, I'm not in the trenches with them, I don't know, but I think from what I see and from popular media and from people that I know that are involved in it, a lot of it is re-inscribing the same tools and the same things that we've been doing for the past 100 years in terms of liberation movements, and again, people coming into my office who are losing their homes the next day or about to lose their children, they're not concerned or a part of Black Lives Matter. They're not concerned about protesting. They're concerned about keeping their house. They're concerned about getting a job so they can pay their electric bill. And so I do not hear necessarily Black Lives Matter speaking to those everyday urgencies. I hear them speaking to systemic urgencies. Yeah, we're getting killed. That is a very important thing to speak to. But again, in terms of these everyday common issues that Black people are dealing with as a result of poverty and oppression, I don't see them, they're a part of the conversation, they're not driving the conversation or pushing it to a place, I won't go on. I'm not trying to disparage them, but that's just my view.
If I could just add something real quick, it speaks a lot, in my opinion, of how these the new prophets or the new leaders of Black liberation are created on social networks. So it speaks about this thing that just is, its popularity has always been there, but it's when popularity and technology come together and how you're able to create selves. So I mean, if you want to speak a little bit about Ferguson is the future. Or not, I mean, I know. But we want to panel with some of the people from Black Lives Matter.
Oh, of course.
Very interesting.
I remember hearing about that, yeah, I almost went. That reminds me that note is a great note, because I was thinking about ego, and like we were discussing about when that candidate for office came to the Stadium Stompers meeting, and you could see it in the body language, right? Like the way he wanted to affect the crowd. He was the candidate. Because it's a matter of crowd magnetism. Like this is ego and celebrity, and it hasn't departed from politics yet. Black Lives Matter has a very ego and celebrity driven crowd dynamic, and we talked about that a lot. So I'm really glad you brought that up, because I was thinking about it in relation to your comparisons between Mao era art and German Romantic art. Like that was really striking, because the centrality of like the figure, the centrality of the leader and stuff. And just as a segue, I was wondering if in your both travels and research, and your like also looking at institutions and looking at the world, but in the context of like Cultural Revolution era China. Did you think of anything as a response to Tony's takedown of identity politics? Like in the context that
I thought it was more mild critique.
Maybe it was a mild critique. But no, I really wondered if something struck, if something was like, oh yeah, I've seen that in the Chinese version or something.
Well, the reason that the Cultural Revolution is interesting is because it's an exact analog to like the Cultural Revolution lowercase cr that happened in like sort of Europe and the Americas in the 60s, right? So like counterculture has like is analogous, but also, and there's also causal links, right? So that like the Maoism is interesting to certain people working here at that time, including like the Black Panthers, like you mentioned. The Cultural Revolution is, and what links those different cultural revolutions, uppercase and lowercase, is that they're identity political. And that's, it just so happens that in the Chinese context, the identity politics actually, it's your class identity. So there's a very contentious issue in, so basically people who were once upper class in 60s and 70s China, who have upper class families, are targets for persecution, right? So if someone in your family once owned land, that makes you a target for workplace harassment, for like you can't have access to certain privileges, you could be killed. There's all sorts of kinds of things, and there's an actual doctrine. There were all these questions about the possibility of reform, right? So like if you once owned property, or if your father once owned property, to what extent like, can you have reformed? So a lot of people like sold out their parents, like, you know, like beat up their teachers, because that was one way to like say that you were reformed, right? Because like to show your distance from that. But there's like this was like a question that was referred back to the party leadership, and the way they came down to it, it's like they're like, it's I think the answer was like, oh, to what extent is your identity or is your political status determined by your class identity? And the answer was like 70%. Right. So there's like a specific formulation of like how intractable that class identity is, and I think that's really interesting because you're always going to have that question, even if it's on different identity lines, right? Like in the United States, it's going to be along racial identity lines because this is a racial country or like a racial government. Or I guess there's racial power at work here, and you have that as well in China, but it's ethnic, not racial. I mean those. So you're always going to have that question about like who counts as black, who counts as white, and then like at what point what extent does your racial identity determine your status? Those questions don't go away, and I think there's actually very few ways for talking about it in the United States, at least. I mean, that's why like something like Rachel Dolezal blows up, right? Because people are like, oh, this is something we're going to talk about, right? Like fringe blackness, or like you have it the other way around, right? Like people who in the conversations about passing, about sort of light-skinned black people passing. I mean, maybe less so now, but you had a very strong, I mean, that's such a centerpiece of Harlem Renaissance literature, is like the conversations about when to pass and when not to pass. But you would have it in a different way now if you want to talk about covering instead of passing. So people who don't necessarily say that they're not a particular identity, but that they minimize those aspects of themselves. Your question was about what do I think of identity politics in the class context of China? Okay,
I think the answer's pretty good.
So yeah,
I mean, you covered, you know, like you
right.
addressed the thing I was curious about.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing about Maoism is that it's a form of Marxism that emphasizes the importance of culture, right? That's why people are interested in Maoism. That's why people are interested in Gramsci. That's why people are interested in certain kinds of anarchism, because an alternative to an organizational, institutional, bureaucratic Marxism that's like Leninist or Stalinist, and it harks back to a certain kind of like Victorian era or like pre-institutional socialism. Because like Maoism is antagonistic towards institutions, and emphasizes the importance of culture, which is why it sort of feeds so well into like neoliberalism.
I have one more thing I have to get done before I can open it up. So I'm sorry taking so long. Diann, actually, are you okay? Are you okay, Diann? I know it's past. It's 11:10 now.
I'm good. I'm good for a bit. I'm at my studio. We'll have to get probably a night long home, but I'm happy to stick around because I might take out in like half an hour or so because there's like school run in the morning and that kind of stuff. So,
oh yeah, we were supposed to be out 10 minutes ago, but I like the way that segued because that thing you said, Diann, about like if you say we're gonna, I mean, because I said like you build a platform and then you infiltrate and corrupt and then you take over the institution, like that's like the anachronistic like asymmetrical power kind of framework for saying, whereas we need like a completely new idea of power, right? Like something that's not just playing from the enemy's book, but it's like writing a new book. Because I'm totally like, I'll settle for the enemy's book, like let's like get our hands dirty, but like but I'm very interested in this idea of writing a new book, and I know you brought that up. You're very clear about that, and I mainly wanted to get hopefully you two could. I was hoping you two would get a chance to kind of exchange about rationalism and the position there, because I think it comes out of the critique of identity politics as well, where like that line that's in the video, like we were told rationalism was male, or I'm paraphrasing, but and I think you mentioned that was going on in some of the departments, which is one of the reasons I initially wanted to bring you guys together. But I'm curious if that dovetails with, you know, use the enemy's book or write a new book. You know, like that would be. There's something.
Just two options.
I think
Yeah.
No, there's not just two. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. One thing real quick.
Write a new book incorporating parts of the enemy's book.
Yes. Okay. So 18 from Metropolarity just said that there's more than both, and then More Mother Goddess just said use both, and then Rasheedah said. You know, write a new book using a few pages, which is like, of course, that's brilliant. Of course, I agree with that. I agree with all of that.
Let's see what Diann said.
I mean, my sense is that like we're in. I mean, I'm about to say this. I don't know if it's true. I haven't. We're definitely in shifting ground, and my sense is it's probably more shifting now and will remain shifting. I mean, it's just sort of the conditions that we now live in. So I think the idea that, you know, we'll have like one idea that will fix this it's like it's fantasy. I mean, in a way, that's like what everyone wants. You know, like watching you know, the circus of the election thing that's going on. It's like you've got like the Sanders and the Trump, and you can tell there's like a huge amount of people on all sides going like, just somebody tell me what's gonna fix this. You know, this system is broken. We need somebody that's gonna tell us what's gonna work. And there isn't a what's gonna work. I mean, if there is, I think it's gonna come from a multitude of sources. It's gonna come through, I mean, a sort of infection. Like infecting a large swathe of the population with, you know, ideas around. Not only is like some sort of egalitarianism right in some sort of ethical way, but it's also the system that we're in isn't actually functioning. It's this mythology that it's this efficient system, and it's just being shown up to be a nonsense, and it's becoming more and more clear. And I think, you know, the impatience with that is evident. I mean, it's evident in a number of ways. So it's like the idea that we sort of take pages from the power book that's going now, or build a new one. In a way, it's got to be all of it, you know, because like some things are going to work. I mean, and some things aren't, and they're going to work in some situations and not others. And like, you know, thinking about there are a myriad of ways that power fucks people up. I mean, and so there's got to be that many ways that it gets countermanded. So yeah.
And just real quick before, something you said is that Sun Ra gives us the tools to interrogate time. The interrogate time thing. You know, that to me is how just a very general, I would even say universal, human rationality fits in to the game board at that point. Because it's really.
So like, I want to hear more about this revolutionary time thing, like what that means. I mean, I know you sort of answered it a bit before, but I'm just really curious about that, what it is, because my own interest around trying to think about like the reality of time in a purely sort of scientific way, like whether it, I mean, there's other arguments where time doesn't exist at all, or it does exist, but then also like how that is produced in the human and this sort of thing, but then also like it does, there was going to be a quote that I was going to read from Smolin about how this has effects in the social and in the political. The fact that there, you know, you believe that time exists and is real, that a future can be designed and created. So it's like I'm wondering if that fits in at all with your idea of revolutionary time and what that would look like.
Yeah, and I could, you know, just briefly say that what I'm talking about is a negation of a negation of a negation, and I was thinking in terms of how do revolutionaries organize their praxis under conditions of a collapsing social, political, economic, civilizational system. And I don't think it is possible if we embrace or incorporate into our cosmologies and epistemologies time as it has been defined and conceptualized. Can I just say one small thing, Diane? You know, I think many people here are familiar with the Revolutionary Student Coordinating Committee and their collapse. And, you know, and I don't, I'm not.
Maybe some people.
Yeah. You in New York?
Yeah, in New York and in Philly. But the thing.
When did it happen? What year?
Last week.
Last week.
What year?
Yeah.
That is really
Last
close.
But, you know, the thing is, I was studying their line, and not with, you know, no put down or criticism. You know, they organized around what they call proletarian feminism. I don't know whether you've ever heard of it, Diane. It probably exists as a theory in places like the Philippines and other places where Maoism is very strong. It's a very important concept within the framework of Western civilization, where I think, and you can, Diane, tell me what you think. I think the principal contradiction in Western civilization is not class, but gender and age. That this divides, and I'll put it this way, white folk more than the class division. And so I was very interested in the Revolutionary Students Coordinating Committee's, you know, revolutionary feminism, even though they collapsed, you know, because of, you know, I think inexperience, by the way. But I think that idea of proletarian feminism, I felt, was very interesting in the internal dynamics of struggle and revolutionary undoing of the system of white power. I don't know why I made myself completely clear. Yes. But it does not apply in the same way in the black lived world. It really doesn't. Yes. And it becomes a problem, and that's where I think, because, you know, one of the things I was working with some of the members on organizing at Community College of Philadelphia, and they were never able to do it. They couldn't get it together, and I think it was because the concept proletarian feminism is a very profound project within the white lived world, the world of racial privilege. But in the world of racial subordination, I don't know that it applies in the same way. And I think the proof of the inadequacy of the theory was that we could not get the type of student organization at community college that we need, given what is going on at Temple. I just want to throw that out.
That's another. There's a lot.
I can be. I'm sorry.
There's a lot going on.
Talk too long.
Was Diane going to answer?
Was it? I mean, what?
What was the question? She said?
I don't know. There's something said around that gender is more not damaging or something, but it's the stronger
Contradiction.
point of inequality. Yeah, that was it. I don't know that I would separate them out. I mean, I don't know. I mean, all of these things are all sort of mixed up, because I mean, if you have middle class women, upper class women, you know, there was a study recently, like looking at people in Britain and how much they make coming out of college, and people from wealthier backgrounds men make something like £8,000 a year more when they're from wealthy backgrounds. Women make something like £5,000 a year more if they're from wealthy backgrounds. But it's like, okay, so that discrepancy is still there, but then that is substantially more than people from working class backgrounds. So it's sort of, it's all sort of in there. I wouldn't necessarily say one is sort of stronger than the other. I mean, one thing I wanted I mean, actually jumping back to this revolutionary time thing, because I think there's something to it. It's really, it's sort of where my interest really is. I mean, I was thinking about, and also it brings in this thing of like taking different pages from different rule books, sort of thinking about time in relation to something like finance, where you have like projections of future markets and people essentially betting on the future and money being made in the now based on a fiction that's constructed in the future. And now that is something that's used in capitalism, but that as a tactic might actually be quite useful for a leftist project. So like that, those conceptions of time might actually, is one of the things out of one of the pages out of a rule book that might fit well into some sort of idea of revolutionary time.
Interesting.
I love that.
Yes, I just started thinking about that.
So I think we can do two, because we're really over time. Or we can like not do any and like, I don't know, music or...
I mean, I'm done with questions. There was like a very small thing that I just wanted to let, and I don't want to speak for everybody, so if you don't agree, it would be totally fine to say something. But just to insert us in a way that is not so passive, that we're just here to like, you know, make sound with y'all, and we're not like, and we're on. You were
Speak up so Diann can hear you.
You were talking earlier about, just when you were going through how you're thinking about reclaiming your idea, the ideas of time and all these things, and almost like dealing with it in a language that breaks out of where it's, it's clear in my head, so I'm stretching here. But, so, my feeling about playing with Julius and Haru and Watson and what we get the chance to do, and like, you know, we also have, in a musical context, we have all of these things, like how we're supposed to deal with time, how we're supposed to deal with the language, and like down to a bodily thing, down to like a politics of the body, where it's like, you know, if you play guitar, like this is literally the muscular shape of how you play the scale right, or these are the chords you play, like this is the progression, you know, 12 bars, like all this stuff, and that like a lot of the way that this works, a lot of the time is that you do this so that you can get to your language that's in the future. You know what I mean? Keep doing this and we're doing these exercises and thinking through it in this way, in the way that it's linear, it's unidirectional, and you will eventually arrive, or you'll, you know, again, this chasing after what you're going to get to, like your final destination or whatever. And for me, like the whole focusing more on the body, it's like all of a sudden, if you're thinking about, it's already here. Like in terms of, if coming up, you know, people call whatever you want, like something revolutionary, like people look at Train or whatever, and they're like, this language was revolutionary or whatever, and like, if it's if it's, I'm being somewhat metaphorical, but getting out of the way that you're taught to supposed to deal with it in the same way temporally in terms of musically, and all of a sudden it's literally in your hands, and you actually just have to explore what's already there, like what is now. But it's something, and that because it's a new language now, because you're talking like kinesthetically or whatever you're talking about. It's like, and it's all super. I don't know. It's like the language of the future already being in your muscles, and you just haven't like the codes like in like some written language is like in there, and like all of a sudden it's not about like learning the system and getting it to work for you, and it's like it's all like it came out, and for me in terms of like the way that we interact and all this stuff is like, I don't know, there's some link there, and that's what I really want to do, and I don't think I'm anywhere near there yet, because I also now feel like I'm working with all this raw material that I don't know what to do with, and it's like almost like playing badly, like I just can't play almost, because it's like this new thing that I don't know how to take control of it yet. But when you were talking with David earlier, and it's so far, we've gone through so much that I lost it. But I really wanted to, for the sake of interdisciplinarity,
And it's also complexified by your collaboration with everybody reaching time, and your drummer's going in and out of time. Like
Can I add to that, Alex?
Yeah. This is the band.
In relation to time and also identity and also creating the future, a lot of it for me and then for the group comes out of the language. Just from the aspect of, trying to say something that is always present because it exists inside of you. You hear what you want to say in your inner ear, before you approach attempting to actually say it into physical space. You have to hear it. You have to be able to see it before you can speak it. And then beyond that, before you can speak it on the horn or on the guitar, you have to be able to speak it out of your mouth. And so, I was talking about Nomo and everything else earlier, but it's a strange kind of like location and dislocation at the same time, where this language exists inside of you. A simple phrase is already existing, and it's existing inside of you. Therefore, it exists outside of you. It exists beyond you because you have. Excuse me. Echolocation. Yeah, sort of like that, where it's like you. Sort of, yes, sort of, but just in terms of locating the self is where it's at, where you see this sound, and this sound is a reflection of your experiences and how you interact with the world and others, and also with yourself and with the divine, if you acknowledge it or don't. It's like you see this image, you hear this image, and then the different processes of working it out, and it helps you get closer to that image. And at the same time, the closer you get to that image, the farther you get from that image, because you're always realizing more images. And so like my specific research, a lot of it came out of my Du Bois class with Dr. Monteiro.
I didn't know we had
Yeah, this is a long time ago. But so like it's I call it it's the paradigmatic dynamics of culture. It's a paradigmatic dynamics of culture. It's the study of cultural energy and its movements throughout space and time. And so we sometimes bring into our real functioning reality divisions between the metaphysics and the physics. And then we say, oh, my heart. Then we separate that from the physical work that we may do, or the physical interactions that we may have. And these things all exist within their own time spheres, their own physical and conceptual spaces, which are all real in terms of energy, because if energy exists, then it doesn't matter whether it's the energy of a thought, the energy of an idea, or the energy of this chair sitting in front of me, it is real. And so like, approaching the language, it's always about the language to make things real. Again, I have this sound in my head that has been sitting in my head since the last note I played, but it's real inside of me in the realm of all realms, but yet it has not been made real and functional in the realm of the functional realm, which we are all part of. We are all part of this interaction, this constant exchange of energy, whether we're speaking, breathing, looking at each other, or whatever. So for me, in all of these things, and identity and everything else, it comes down to the language where we exist. We're constantly exchanging energy, whether we say something, whether we codify it in intelligible language or not. All of these interactions and energetic and spiritual and cultural exchanges exist just from walking down the street. See my brother right here, I'm like, yo, that's a hip hat. That's a hip shoe. Just the whole composition irradiates his identity. And then because we are all energy, it's like this is a reflection of me. And so in terms of, these identity politics, a lot of the times I encounter issues with others because for myself, my path is what I come from, the bebop, the jazz improvisational ethic, where, I'm walking down the street, and if something comes up and tells me, hey, you are not you, And if it lays out all this information where it's like, oh, I thought I was Ryan Frazier, Haru Shabakara coming from such and such and such and such, but yet there's this new information that's being revealed that that's not the whole story, but that's completely opposite. It's like, okay, how can I deal with that? How can I deal with identify as a trans woman or a trans male or a homosexual male or a homosexual woman, and then I encounter another example of that does not fit the language that I have constructed for my own identity? And just questions on that, and also how that relates to our politics, saying this Black Lives Matter, like Rasheedah said, Black Lives Matter. It addresses the poverty and everything that people on the ground deal with. But if you ask them, what is Black Lives Matter going to do about getting your house, about keeping your house? It's like there's this other realm that is functioning in, but yet on the ground, I'm still going to lose my house. So like, how does the language that we use and in relation, and even going to Einstein, the theory of relativity, it's all about the relativity that we have, so just concepts of language. I don't have any specific question, just going from what Alex was saying and how we use language to construct our reality, but yet we are always in this netherworld of identity and what the real is because of the language.
Institutionality seems to be the looming question too, right?
Oh, I would love to bring it back and figure out how to build that school, but maybe that'll be in the sequel or something. I don't know. It seems too
Yeah.
Seems like platform is a better choice for you.
Well, platform right now. Bias much, Tony? Tony Yannick here is a part of a very successful platform online. Called the New Center for Research and Practice. Diann has taught, teaches currently, or has?
No, she's taught with us and she will teach again.
Aha! Of course.
She has another one.
Of course. Yes, the platform question, but then with accessibility, I don't know. It's a little too much. Let's do it. We should have done an 8-hour version.
I just wanted to
Council. Yeah.
I just wanted to say, while I could get a chance to get it in, is that I'm puzzled by there's been so many references to Heidegger and these men from a European tradition, and why is everything still coming from this European tradition? Why are we orienting ourselves this way, or why do people choose to orient themselves this way? Or why does legitimacy have to be connected to all this shit some other dudes did one time back then? I'm like, why is it I don't know. Oh, I'm full of rage all of a sudden. Where I'm like, where's the knowledge from this land? Where's the knowledge from the Americas? Where's the knowledge from all this stuff? Why aren't we finding them and throwing the other dudes out and being like, we don't have to be disproving ourselves or whatever from this tradition, this legitimate science. This is what I get from Rasheedah's work so much. It's this concept of time, and all these things are just control systems for this shit that we're all caught up in.
Because they set up economy behind their shit.
Exactly.
Kant never left his neighborhood.
Yes.
I mean, he literally
I don't even know who
changed the
Kant
entire
is,
world.
though. I don't even know who Kant is. I don't know who Heidegger is. I don't know these dudes. So it's on some institutional access and stuff. I went to college, I got all my shit together or whatever, but it's talking about things in these frameworks, they get frustrating to me. Take it out of there. Talk about it right
I
now.
mentioned Heidegger and Kant, but I only mention them as so limited because my reference was Toni Morrison.
And you're referencing a lot more names that I'll recognize than
But I agree with you, 18, so much. That's why this is a research project, collective. We have to really research and Philadelphia is the great place. I'll tell you, for these alternative, revolutionary concepts of time and being.
There has to be
just
some
saying,
I'm like, whoa,
There also is very interesting relationship between pop culture, philosophy, politics, and all that. It's one thing that fiction does really well. He references Toni Morrison. He can bring out Kant in a novel or something. I mean, you don't have to talk about Kant. You don't have like certain groups of people who want to.
And who are those certain groups? And like,
Philosophers,
who's in the mouths?
academics.
So like, who's in the mouths of
I
the
hear you.
people that Rasheedah is
Germans.
working with is what I want to point.
Right.
Like when I,
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, yeah.
It's
I want to
also
talk about content, so don't
I'm
worry
just
about it.
like, who? We can all sit here and talk about all this stuff, but I'm like, who's in the mouths of everybody who really needs? Like, what are they talking about? And if we're gonna look down on the fact that they're talking about Cardi B or whoever, we need to check ourselves and what we're on, and how the distance, how this like intangible distance comes up between.
Which is why, in a large way, I kind of think of universities as a bit of a footnote in the propagation of inquisitive behavior. And you know, like I obviously don't have like some jargon buffer to determine who's an intellectual or not, right? It's like, are they pursuing questions? Like, are they getting excited about pursuing questions? Like, then I feel like I'm interacting with an intellectual, and there's almost like the university plays such a small role there, and so would
The university, like in my opinion, the university is where the common people can go, or where I was told to go to learn how to speak in the language of the elites. And now that I know how to talk to them and tell them what I feel in their language, I just like rage and rage and rage all day long. And it's bizarre to me because I'm like, I'm no different in the terms of like where, this is a very general statement, but like where I'm from and like the people from my block and the people in my family, they don't speak in this language that I've learned to speak. And like, I think it's bullshit that only I am the one that gets to go to have some sort of mobility to speak to them in these ways. I don't know how I got on this, but because science fiction and speculative fiction writing is like, and Metric Polarity, we're science fiction writers. Like, you want to call us activists, you want to call us all kinds of things, and like insert us into your institutions. Like, I went and gave a workshop to these elite college kids going on social justice internships to be like, don't like have some common sense, respect people, like gave them this workshop and was just like, how am I not going to just rage on them the whole time and be like, do you know how to talk to people who aren't from where you're from? That's all I gotta say.
yeah.
How can you communicate to people who aren't from where you're from?
I love
Language is a big problem.
I love that, like, as a punctuation and just like the standing questions, like what you said about the university is like correct. So like, what are we gonna build? Like,
Do we have to build anything? Do we have to build more empires? Like, a brief anecdote. I went to Mexico, where I have family from, and went to the anthropology museum there and looked and gazed upon the remnants of the Aztec and Mayan cultures, which were great civilizations and all this stuff, but they were still patriarchal empires that oppressed people and murdered women and like all these things. And also in the museum was this collection of stuff from this like lesser band of people who weren't as civilized, meaning they weren't as sophisticated, or supposed to mean that they weren't as sophisticated. And I was like, oh, they're like these punks, they're like just regular schmoes or something. They like didn't have they're like not trying to be all overachieving and like have their names last into eternity and like attain immortality and all this stuff. And it made me be like, where's all the monuments from the native peoples from this part of the Americas? Like, they didn't build empires? Like, where are they? Or like, why is everything aspiring to be these like grander and grander things? Like, what's the point of technology or globalization or the shrinking or collapsing of space and time through technology if we're just gonna try and like make things to control and understand it all? I don't think we need to understand it all. I don't think it all needs to be controlled. I think we need to invest like these perceptions or something. But that's me.
Alright, so in the 12-hour version, maybe we'll like do the argument about completing the map of the world versus not completing the map of the world. Like that would be a lot. I think. All right, let me just break it down to that like really crude binary, and then we'll do like yes or no's and we'll vote, just to see what'll happen, and we don't have time to pursue it, right?
Okay.
Like, does human rationality need to understand and map the world?
Let Diann go first.
Should humans use their rationality to complete like the maps of the world and like keep investigating, keep digging, keep learning? Like, should humans do that or not? Well, we're just gonna have a vote. Well, I mean, Tony's gonna elaborate, but let's just have a vote. Oh.
Everybody voting or the panel voting?
Let's start with the panel, and then everybody else will vote.
Okay.
All right, who's on the side of humans and rationality will like keep digging and complete the map of the world?
I don't think that's a good question.
Okay. I was gonna raise my hand. Full disclosure, but go on.
That's all. I would not.
You wouldn't put it as like such a binary.
No, fuck binaries. They're useless anymore.
Yeah.
Useless everywhere.
I think here I'm in the same camp with Diann.
She would.
I think I am, but I wouldn't want to be put on
one side or another
to answer that question.
Indeed. Maybe the voting's not gonna
Well,
Does anybody want to vote?
I was going to say vote no.
You were going to
I
vote
mean,
no?
I just think it's that simple.
Alright.
That's all.
I mean, I think if there's a rationality into territory, maybe, but like.
is it about the eventual completion of all of knowledge?
What does
No,
that
it's just
mean?
about
It's
eventually keep
Well, it's
digging.
hypothetical. What?
We're just going to keep digging.
I think from the jazz improvisational ethic,
From the jazz improvisational ethic.
whatever ultimately will lead to our collective survival will take place. If that means to run away from all investigation of our past and futures, then I think that will happen. I think if it means going full in, like dropping all of our possessions and going into it, I think at some point it will happen. I mean, the evidence of, that I've seen on this planet and other dimensions that I've experienced and everything else is that, there is an improvisational common sense to the unfolding of this all. It doesn't always make sense in the moment. Sometimes it makes sense before you get there. Sometimes it makes sense after. Sometimes it does make sense in the moment. But there is, like you said, there is no binary, although the binary is the very fundamental basis of it all. So it's like, it's weird because like nothing is ever binary because the complex is so wide and vast cosmically and quantumly, but yet all of this is still functioning from the binary, from nu to ra, from dark to light, from silence, to the piecing of the silence of sound. Silence is the fullness. Darkness is the fullness of light. Stillness is the fullness of movement, but yet it is still set in the binary of stillness, which is the fullness, and then the specifics of a specific movement. The binary of the whole complete silence where every sound exists, and then the breaking up of that to a specific sound where we have the whole, the unity, and then the individual and the specific, and the combinations and the multiple, reformations and interactions of this in the process of a physical reality that is in flux and unfolding. To me, that kind of is like that. At the same time validates and proves the binary, but at the same time it destroys and runs away from that because there are so many, just in our own bodies, there are so many processes that are going on. We accept it as one life doing something, but yet every single process is a binary process. Our whole lives are binary processes. We breathe in, we exhale, we eat, we shit. We drink, we piss, all these things, so through the multiple variations of the binaries for each individual, each set, each system, then we get this entire cosmos, which is very much not binary,
Heard that.
Could I maybe is it maybe because this comes from because you're coming from, or you're not because you're coming from, but because we're talking from a certain philosophical point of view about whether or not we must find more knowledge or not. Maybe it's not a matter of must. Maybe sometimes we just want to find more knowledge because we want to be able to cure cancer or something like not because like we have this urge because of this teleological like pinpoint of like some kind of like singularity in the sky of where we need to go, but just because like that would be good to know things, you know, like do we have to
Very true.
to conquer with it necessarily, or do we just know things because maybe that'd be better? Who knows?
It's
Maybe
good to
not.
know things
you know?
to like trick your enemy, like to be cunning.
Yeah.
You know how they're gonna work. You understand how they're gonna work, then you know how to like
Alright,
escape.
we got one last thing from Zio.
Just want to point out, like we're not like discovering things. We create knowledge, so it's an infinite, not a, you know.
Sure.
So like the idea of like, right, mapping. You know, do we want to map the world as a conquering? It's more of a releasing. As far as
This is why, like,
Hey,
she
that's
used-
good.
Diann uses for the acceleration. They're using it in navigation
Great.
instead of mapping.
Yes.
Great.
Because you're always navigating. You're not
Navigation, yes.
mapping. You're exploring your territory,
Yes.
and it's always expanding. Always.
Diane, I mean, I've been thinking of you for the past
I
like
did.
5 minutes, 10 minutes. Did you hear the question?
I didn't hear that.
It was just, and then Tony Yannick brought up navigation because our friend Zio in here said, like, you know, the mapping and the digging isn't the same thing as the releasing, like, because
It's not discovery, it's creation. That way.
yeah, because it's not discovery, it's creation. So you're not like uncovering knowledge with a shovel. You're releasing knowledge, you know, and like that distinction, and then that's when Tony Yannick brought up navigation on Facebook.
Yeah, and I ran like 2 times.
So yeah, did you have any last thing to say about that? Because what we have.
Oh God.
All right. You know what? Too bad. All right, we'll hit
But
Facebook.
it's
We'll hit emails because this is too much, right? Let's wrap. All right, we gotta wrap. We gotta wrap. We're gonna tweet about it. It's gonna be awesome. But we definitely gotta wrap up because.
I would actually, what I would really like is just sort of beam myself over and have a beer with everybody.
That's. Which is why we need to keep building, so we can build the, transmolecularizer.
Talk to
Diann Bauer.
Thank you, Diann. Thank you, Diann, coming all the way from London. We will pour out a beer for you.
Okay. Yes, come with me.
Thank you, the rest of you guys.
Oh, I know, I hung up like way too fast because I was hovering and like I accidentally.
It doesn't matter. She's like 20 minutes behind where she wanted to go anyway.
Yeah, I know. I feel terrible. I let that.
It's really quiet.
I feel terrible. I let that get out of hand.
Boy, this has been
Yeah.
It was like 2004, 2000.